Hey guys, this is Calm. I'm here with Fusion. We're doing a late night blitz version of the Carlsen Anand match, World Championship match going on right now. This is game 4, as you can tell by that perfectly drawn 4 on
It
the
is
board.
quite perfect, yeah.
It took Fusion hours, so um, yeah. So, current state of play, it's 3 draws from the first 3 games. Anand is white, he'll be looking to press in this game. And so far, I'd say that he's probably had the better of the draws. He's comfortably made the draws when he's wanted, and he's kind of dictated the pace of it, I would say. But of course, Carlsen's kept the score even, which basically means that Anand's at no advantage. Carlsen's had one extra white at this stage, so yeah. So going in, you ready?
Yep, let's do it.
Okay.
E4! There we go. That's like 1-0 already.
So last time we saw this, Carlsen played the Karakan, and we kind of looked at some line that Anand could have played, but
Oh
didn't, with
yeah.
some Queen G4 kind of thing. So probably he's like researched that deeply over the last couple of days with his team. And Carlsen then, I think, just ruins that by playing E5 next move. Like that. So E5 isn't really a surprise because Carlsen plays this pretty much all the time in normal tournaments. And then he has a wide variety of lines that he goes into based on this. I was glad to see that he's played knight c6 though to get into one of his normal Rai Lopez lines, which I think fits his style very well, compared to playing something like a Petrov and playing for a draw. It wouldn't fit his kind of match philosophy either in trying to push the games along by playing a very kind of drawy line like the Petrov.
If I were Vichy here, I'd play Bishop C4, and then that would get rid of Carlsen's Rory Lopez preparation.
Maybe it would certainly be less common at the highest level, but at the same time, I think this is an opening that Anand could have expected to play against a lot in his own preparation, so he may, have this worked out for a long variety of moves by playing Bishop e5 and just going into a Rai Lopez.
So there are a few different moves you can play as black in response to Bishop E5, but at the high level, this is a pretty popular response. I think Kramnik proved that this was a good reply. That was it, the Berlin defense.
Yeah, this is, well, not yet, but
Not yet.
yeah, one of the lines this can go into is the Berlin. Generally, you'll see the top players playing knight f6 or a6, move 3. Uh, if you play lower level players, they might play something like d6 or something, which is very passive, but you can kind of exploit that with a quick d4 as white, and you just gain space and everything. It's quite pleasant. But here we'll just have normal kind of development. So white castle's here, and basically the idea is that if black were to take on e4, we win back that pawn quickly, because you can play rook e1 and then e5, or, hang, essentially. Generally, if they take, you play like a d4 first or something, though, just to open up the d file, and then you still have the same kind of position where if they take on e4, they can get pinned by the rooks, so they generally play the knight back, and you get some, variation. So he does take on e4, and then d4 is played, and knight d6 back. And this is just kind of the start of the Berlin variation.
What makes it the Berlin?
Well, basically, by playing this knight back, he's voluntarily going into some, well, not endgame, but there's a line
Where's
that Kramnik
where's
used.
the wall? That's what I want to see.
Well, basically, after bishop takes knight on c6, you have d takes c6, and then you have d takes e5, and then the knight has to move, and then you trade queen. So it's basically an endgame. And in terms of the wall, obviously that was, knocked down many years ago, so I have no idea. We have the Stonewall Dutch, but that's a different opening completely.
Yep. So these moves were played, as you said.
Yeah, so this is basically the normal way to play it, and then there's quite a few options for white here. Actually, Qatar on chessvideos.tv made a really good series on e4, e5 for black, although I think that was at the end of 2009, start of 2010, and he recommended this line for black. And actually, if you watch the video, it's pretty interesting, the ideas he comes up. Well, not necessarily that he comes up with, but the ideas that the variation kind of presents to itself, because white has more space and he's got a safe king, but black has two bishops in response to it and he's got kind of an open position. The actual books I have on this, they recommended a move. I think this is the Easy Guide to the Rai Lopez. It recommended like some knight g5 move here, which I actually really liked. Immediately threatening the fork and f7. So it kind of forces the king away, but then you're able to use that knight to come back to e4, which controls the c5 square to stop the bishop coming to c5. But I found that in terms of watching high-level games, it's very uncommon.
This is pretty much a nightmare for me as white. It's like already we're almost in an endgame. It's too simplified. I've got no queen. It's gone already.
Yeah.
I'm like, no.
Well, you have attacking potential, but you don't have mating potential, I'd say, which leads to a different type of game completely. I'd say this opening is a really good fit for Magnus because he wants to play middle and end games against Anand, and he doesn't really want to go into the super critical theory kind of stuff.
H3, next move played. Very critical line, obviously.
So the idea of this is, I think you play g4 in a lot of lines, and you move your knight on f3 and you push f4, and even though you're opening up your king, you're gaining a lot of space, and basically you have 4 against 3 on that king side, so you're looking for some endgame where you can make a pass pawn over there, because obviously the d pawn has been moved to c6 as well, so it's some idea. I guess you can also play like moves like bishop f4 and drop it back to h2 if you need, but I don't know. It's a move. It's not the most critical, obviously.
So next bishop d7 played.
Yeah.
Okay.
You generally play bishop d7 instead of bishop e6 because of knight g5, and you don't really want to give up your 2 bishops, which you sacrificed your pawn structure for.
Yep. So rook d1, just pinning. Bishop e7. Just developing. It's all kind of developing, really. Somewhat natural. King c8, get out the pin.
Yep.
I guess one of the themes in the Berlin defense for black is instead of bringing your rooks into the center, you push your pawns on the outside and then you bring them in that way.
You can do, yeah. There's multiple options in terms of ways to play it. You can play more aggressively with your 2 bishops by pushing the pawns on the king side, or you can go for some line where you play a quick rook d8 after this king c8 and aim to trade a pair of rooks there, and then you can bring your king to e8 and trade the other rook on d8. It's an option which isn't, it doesn't seem amazing, but actually it kind of works out to black's advantage a bit because he's getting rid of the rooks, so he's having less material on the board and still got his 2 bishops compensation, and bishops are obviously better when they have an open position. With less rooks on the board, obviously there's going to be more space for them to kind of use.
Okay, bishop g5, attacking that bishop, the black's dark bishop, so trying to exchange off one of the bishop pair of black. And, well, there's nothing much she can really do to stop that.
I mean, I guess he could play bishop c5, but then you have the situation where white's going to play knight e4 with tempo, push your bishop away, and if you manage to get c4 in there, which is probably a good move, then black kind of wants to play c5 to guarantee some space for a c6 bishop, but it'll get his own bishop kind of stuck on b6, so it's a good idea for white, I think, to trade off those bishops to get rid of the bishop pair, and then you're just kind of playing with this position with less material, but you've got your advantages still, but you've got rid of one of black's.
So I imagine this has been looked at many times in their opening preparation. It's this kind of position they would expect, and probably computers will.
Yeah, I mean, we've actually got the times here as well, so we can see that I haven't spent long at all, really, especially Magnus.
So rook d2, I guess, is gonna try doubling up on the d file.
Yep.
Which is well, interesting, I guess.
So I think if we look for plans, yeah, basically white's trying to double on the d file, as you say, and then he'll try and take more space with like knight e4 and c4 or something. And then maybe... Well, I'd have played knight e4 a bit earlier to stop this immediate c5, but it would come later anyway via b6 first. But I just think knight e4 is a normal move. And then for black, obviously we've got a bad piece in rook on h8, but we can play this other rook to d8, and basically we want to get our bishop out of the way, but still, you know, take advantage of the fact that we have a bishop. So we want to put it on the longest diagonal we can, and obviously c6 looks pretty good for that, because it also controls e4 and d5, and if we can do that and trade our rooks off, then the bishop should stand slightly better than the opposing knight. But again, our development is slow because of our rooks, and we've got these double pawns.
Okay. Rook d1, bishop e6.
Okay, so if you don't put the bishop on c6, then probably you're going to put the knight there instead, or something like that.
Yeah, what would be the reason for not playing it to c6? I don't know. Just probably wants a knight there instead. Guess it's perfectly fine either way.
Yeah, well, I guess... Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe he just wants to... I mean, you want to control d5 in these lines, of course. So, if by doing this you have the option of playing pawn to c6 still, if he really thinks that's a threat, and obviously knight g6 can't be played anymore because that h6 move earlier after bishop g5, so maybe he actually wants to keep the possibility of just playing c6 and then knight d5 or something like that, just to really block up this d file where white's rooks are. Because if you manage to play c6, you can also play king c7 and trade your rooks via rook d8 there. Whereas here, obviously, you can't play rook d8 because it can just get taken. So, could be a reason.
Knight e1. It's kind of strange looking move. Guess he's trying to open up his f pawn.
Yep, correct. Or you could also argue that maybe he wants to bring his knight to f4. That helps control over d5 and also attacks the bishop on e6 again. You can also kind of do it with tempi by playing knight d3 next move as well, because c5 would be hit.
Yeah, okay. So, knight g6, stacking the e5 pawn, and then natural move, knight g3, although I guess after c4, he's going to be dropping a pawn.
Yeah, well, I guess c4, knight c5 is the plan, because then if he takes on e5, you can take on e6, and then after pawn recaptures, you can play a rook to the e file and, you know, kind of skewer that knight and the pawn.
Yeah.
It's
going to be difficult to hold on to.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you have knight c4 there intermediately, but then you can just play b3, push the knight away, and then the knight can't really go anywhere to threaten a pawn or anything, so... yeah, I think that's enough.
b6, just defending that c pawn, because that was also attacked.
Mm-hmm.
And then knight e2. Now this is a very pivotal move in the game, because he's hanging his a2 pawn.
Yeah, so I think the normal idea here is that if he takes knight 2, it's too risky, because you can play b3 and then you can play knight c3 and you can trap him. But here, obviously, the difference compared to the normal situation is you can play your pawn to c4, and because that's a double pawn anyway, that's like quite a tempting move for black. I mean, I guess Anand's idea is knight f4 here, because he wanted to play that before anyway. Or maybe he wants to play b3 and c4 and just get his knight out of the way so he can play that. I mean, honestly, it's kind of a bit confusing to make a normal plan, just because all these knight moves kind of are hard to see, especially when they're backwards. And I imagine it's still an element of preparation, but Anand spent over half an hour in here, and Carlsen's just spent the 10 minutes, so it makes me feel like Carlsen has this line better prep than Anand.
Let's see how long he takes to make his next move. Like, quarter of an hour.
15 minutes. So yeah, he definitely thought about it long enough.
And I guess he had to work out if he could escape.
Yeah.
With his bishop, and he thinks he can. So let's see how Vishy responds to this.
So I mean, b3 has got to be the only move, because otherwise the bishop can escape normally.
Yeah.
So then the thing is, what do you do now?
And then c4, knight c1.
Okay. So it hits the bishop, and after this pawn captures, we recapture with our pawn, which means that the bishop can't escape through that normal diagonal. So instead it has to go down here.
But now he can escape, and there's nothing Vishy can do about it.
Yeah.
So he is down a pawn, but he has managed to gain a lot of space, and you know, his rooks have nice doubles, and that bishop is on b1 is not great. His rook on a8 is still rooks are still on their original squares.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think he had a lot of those advantages before he gave the a2 pawn.
Yeah.
And also that bishop on b1 can become good later, especially if we play something like bishop e4 here. And then it controls a lot of squares, so it's good again, kind of. And I think it was just kind of an oversight by Vishy, really, because that sequence of moves that was played doesn't seem like the hardest thing to, see this position coming up in the future.
No, not for a world champion anyway, with plenty of time.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if he wanted to, if he just made an oversight, but
I mean, I guess at the same time he wants to push because he's white, and he kind of had a bit of a bit of the better side of the games in the previous ones, so maybe he wanted Carlsen to think about it and then not want to get into complications, but I don't think that's necessarily the best idea against Carlsen, because even though he wants to play like a calm position where he can just kind of outplay people, it's not like he's bad with tactics or anything.
No. Yeah, don't want to play calm positions. Want to play fusion positions. That's where it's at. So here we go. King b7, connecting the rooks, and now the knight comes into c3, attacking the bishop.
Yeah, so the bishop's got to run. f5 is the only square.
And then I guess knight e2 now, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you could play g4 immediately, just like gaining that space.
Yeah, okay.
And then you push the bishop right away. I could go to e6, but then you have the fork with just f5.
Yeah.
So it's basically pushed right the way back, so now you probably play the knight e2 or something. Or knight d3, which does the same thing. He kind of blocks your rooks though, so that was the decision he had to make.
Yeah, I guess he will move it again soon.
Yeah, at the same time, a move like rook d8 is not a threat to white, because then you can play knight c5 check and pick up that rook.
So, for me now, it's kind of tricky to see. Well, I mean, one idea that I can see already is like h5 for black here, because you want to kind of disrupt his pawns and start getting that rook into the game. And I don't know, it just looks with the bishop eyeing down on g4, you want to try and get some space of that as well.
Yeah, that looks like a good idea to me, because obviously you're opening up the rook like you say, and a kind of move to block that, which would be normal, would be g5, but then h3 hangs. Also opens up the f5 square for the black bishop. So I think instead, after h5, white would have to play f5. But you could argue that's also in his plan anyway, to push those pawns, again, because he has this 4 against 3 on the king side. That's kind of his endgame plan. And it seems like the best response to it, and then maybe after f5, knight moves, you'd want to play something to, maybe like a king f2 to g3 or something, just kind of supporting those pawns, which may be the best way to go.
I just play h5, so we can see how this progresses.
It's a good plan, I think.
So f5.
Yeah.
Knight e7.
f5 is probably the only move, yeah.
And then knight b5.
Okay, so I think he just wants to put his knight on d4, probably. With the idea that that helps support f5 again, and it also protects the e6 square a bit if we ever push a pawn to e6. Also, you have attacks on c7 after a rook move to the c-file, and if black wants to prevent that, he either has to put, for example, his knight in the way, which could be a liability later on if we make it move, or he has to move his c-pawn forwards, in which case we have knight d6 check, which can be pretty bad if we can take on f7 or something.
So they swap on the g4,
and
then rook h4, attacking this pawn.
Yeah, so he gets his rook active. So this is kind of why I was saying maybe king f2 instead of this knight b5, because my idea would just be like play king g3 here and all would be fine. But then again, I wouldn't have the potential attacks on c7 or something. So I would imagine that Vishy's plans something aggressive, and maybe he thinks he can just play knight e2 here to hold that. Or maybe he thinks he can ignore it and attack on c7 immediately, but I'd imagine he has to play,
knight f2. Okay, so then knight c6.
So
attacking the e-pawn.
Yeah, so there's a few ways we can deal with that. We can put something on c2 or c1 to, kind of pin that knight to c7. But then we have to think about what we do on just a simple move like a6 to push our knight away. So it's not so clear, but at the same time, the only other way we defend the e-pawn is by putting a rook on the e-file, and that kind of lessens our grip over the d-file, so it's not so clear. I think even though it looks like Magnus is really tied up, he's got enough compensation to where white can't do everything he wants. Yeah.
That's control over d-file.
Okay.
Okay, so rook c2, yeah, that is what he did play.
Okay. So my question there was, what happens on a6, which would just, in my opinion, kind of push the knight away. And it's not so obvious to me what the answer is.
How about something crazy?
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Because obviously we're threatening to take on c6, so we'd be winning our piece back. If he plays something like bishop d7 to protect the knight, because if he moves the knight, obviously we can take on c7. Here I think we can play e6 maybe to push the bishop away. So probably after takes, bishop has to go back to e8. And I wonder what happens after knight d4 here. Because obviously you can play knight takes knight, but then rook takes c7. And are we mating?
Yeah, looks like it.
Yeah, because after knight takes knight, we check, the king can only go back, and then we've actually got this checkmate here. So that's pretty cool to work out, actually, because I didn't realise that during the game. But that was, I mean, I missed this game because I was at work, but I saw the,
Yeah, right.
at the end.
Work. I'm sure. Anyway, so A5 was the.
So
was played
A5 is
again.
played instead. So I guess the idea of that is that there's no B4 in the future. It gives a little more breathing room to the king, and it, kind of means we can maybe push like we did on the other side and just push A5, and if takes, so we get our rook out.
Yeah. So Rook C4 seems like a natural move to stop him playing A4, and it also defends G4 as well.
Yeah, which I think is especially good because it means we can move our other knight again. So yeah, originally when he sacked the A2 pawn, I didn't think he had much from it, but it seems like he's managed to get some pressure now. Just by the time I think he gained on that bishop with like the F5 move and so on. So he definitely has some compensation for it. Whether it's enough is another kind of question.
So again, still this E5 pawn is hanging, but that threat on C7 is the reason why it's hanging.
Yeah, and it's awkward to see how we can deal with that threat, so probably we're just going to have to ignore it, and it looks like that's what Magnus does here with his G6 move.
G6, that's interesting. I guess the move. Oh, Rook C1, Rook DC1. It's played. What other possibilities were there?
I mean, it's awkward to deal with this. I mean, playing Rook C4 helped against the threat on G4 because we have two pieces defending if we have a take on G6. But at the same time, if we take on G6, we're getting rid of our protection over the E6 square, so you can play the bishop there in future. So I quite like Vishy's idea of just ignoring it and going straight after his attack, because I think we can gain time with it, because I think it pretty much forces bishop d7 as the only move.
Yep, now we can play e6.
Yeah, so now we can go for this plan instead, and then basically we'll have the opportunity in future to take on f7, or if he didn't take it, but obviously he has to. Because if we'd managed to take on f7, then we'd be very close to promoting. So instead we play this, and then bishop e8 is going to be the only move. And,
so this is kind of similar to before. Would we expect, what, 94 here?
I mean, 94 is possible, but he actually got out of a lot of those checkmates by playing that king a6 move. Playing that a5 move, rather, because he's got king a6 in those variations.
But knight e4, that's an interesting move, because he's letting his g4 pawn.
Yes, that's really aggressive, it looks like. So obviously the most immediate move to look at is just takes g4 with check, and then the idea, I guess, from Vishy is that you can play knight d6 check, like that sacrifice, to get rid of the bishop on e8 to be able to take on c6. This is quite a ambitious plan, but it's hard to see what I can do against it. Maybe, I mean, I guess he can play rook takes knight and sack that way, or maybe there's something else, but yeah, it's pretty interesting. Given that the rook is on this square, this rank, he's able to play rook takes c4 at least in a lot of these positions, to at least lessen the attack somewhat if the knight ever moves. But obviously you have to be out of the position where it would be checked to be able to do that.
So he plays his rook back to f8, because obviously it was under attack, and
okay, so this is the safe way to do it. Instead of the knight d6 like I was suggesting, I guess you can just play knight d4, because then you're not giving up a knight to get rid of the defender, you're just attacking the piece an extra time.
Yeah.
So that actually makes more sense than my variation.
So it's looking a bit better than it was before for Vichy.
Yeah, he's definitely got a big attack coming, but at the same time he is 2 pawns down, so he's got to. I think he's got to make something happen at least. To at least only be 1 pawn down if his attack doesn't work. So he takes on d4. That was probably forced, and then he gets the pawn back on c7.
And then we pick up his knight on d4. And now we're at the stage of the game where we've got this pass pawn for white on e6. It's quite advanced, so black has to be careful about that. And
yeah, but king c3 is important because if you look at king e5, which seems like the most natural move, you can get in trouble with rook f5 mate. So not everything is working to Vichy's plan because he'd have liked to play an aggressive king move like that.
Yeah.
So instead king c3, e7, just pawn e7 is threatened here. So black's got to do something about that.
So he checks him. Perhaps a better way to stop this check would have been like rook e3 instead of king e3 instead of king c3. Just so he can then sort of control the DNF files with his king, as it were, to stop the rooks coming in to his position.
Yeah, I'm not completely sure why he played king c3, because to me it looks like having the c3 square open is useful because it keeps our rooks connected, and we can also play knight c3 at some point. So yeah, I'm not sure why he played king c3. It was the last move of the time control, I think. So
yeah, so they made the time control. So okay. No, it was the first move. 41.
Oh, okay. So
yeah,
I guess he just wants to shelter his king then.
Yeah,
because that's the only kind of reason you go back like that.
I guess he's looking at the queenside majority and thinking, well, these pawns are probably gonna disappear. And then he wants his king on the queen side.
Yeah.
So rook e3, attacking the knight. And I see, I guess. So rook c8.
Yeah, so I guess if he just takes on c8, we recapture. If he takes on e4, then we take the bishop. And that rook on e8 helps us support the e6 pawn. So then it would be fine. But again, it's 2 against 3 in this rook endgame, so that would be a draw, I think. We'll see whether Carlsen wants to go for that or whether he wants to...
As we know, all rook endgames are drawn.
Well, Carlsen's one of these people who just kind of plays on in a lot of positions, and it's...
annoying.
Annoying, and he manages to make several wins out of them, so... It's interesting.
Yeah, rook d3. Just attacking that b3 pawn and leaving the bishop exposed.
Yeah, but then you'd run into rook takes b3 as well, so maybe white wants to play something like rook c3 here, but who's rook from the first rank?
You could take it, right? Because after this you can run away.
Maybe. Yeah, probably, because you can't really do anything because you can't capture the knight on e4 because your rook hangs. So I guess yeah, he could have done that.
And then it would have been pretty much over.
Yeah, so obviously Magnus wouldn't go for that. He'd have taken on e4 instead, I guess.
Yeah. So rook a8 check first. Before he's going to take the bishop.
Okay.
Just wanted to check him, and as you said, yeah, he'll take the e4 knight, and now two rooks against 2 rooks, and
yeah, there's only 1 pawn more, and it looks like it's going to be hard for white to protect that pawn.
Probably what's going to happen is he's going to have to exchange the e6 or the g6 pawn for the e6 pawn.
Yeah,
and then it'll be
he would like to do that, and that would be a draw if you managed to just leave the 2 pawns against the 1 on the.
So pushing the pawn, that seems pretty natural, I guess.
Obviously, a quick trick is if you move this rook on the e-file, if black moved that, you'd be able to play rook g8 check.
B8 check.
B8 check, yeah. And then the king takes, and then the pawn could just promote with check. So,
are you observing from black side?
No, from white side.
Just dyslexic, okay. Okay, so I was expecting something like rook d to e3.
Yeah, that would seem like the most obvious to me.
Is there something wrong with that? This move? No?
Not that I can see.
I guess...
Well, I guess maybe he just plays rook here, for example, just aiming to trade, and that would lead to that draw in endgame.
Yeah, okay.
Because we could do this. Oops. If we go back, what were we saying? If it was this. Oh god.
And then this. That's what you're saying.
Okay, so this, and this just leads to this, because then we take here and we take here, and it's the same thing.
Yeah. Okay. So...
Instead, this was placed. This means black's more ambitious because he wants to keep his pawn on. He wants to protect that. Although I'd say it's risky to leave that pawn on the 7th rank with less attacks against it, whereas his, pawn has a lot of the board to go. But I guess he thinks it's his best chance for a win, and obviously knowing Magnus, he's gonna try for it.
So rook c3, just trying to swap off the rooks again. That's all Vishy's trying to do now. Yeah. Swap it off, get the draw. So check here, and then obviously rook c2 is forced, because otherwise you lose your rook. And it goes back here. King a2.
Just to get out of the check if he takes on b3, but if he takes on b3, obviously then we can do that trick to promote our pawn, so...
Yep. So g5, pushing that pawn. Rook d2. Rook d2.
I guess he's just trying to come in with a check maybe against...
Not quite sure why, because I guess then if he moves this... I'm not sure why, to be honest.
No, it's not completely obvious, but it's, yeah. Just carry on.
So rook e5, check. Yeah, because Incas comes out like this, and...
Oh, okay, so that makes sense. So he's doubling like this so that he can push the pawn. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So now this kind of forces Magnus to go along this route, and there'll be no way for white to doubly protect that e8 square, so... Yeah.
Lots of checks, and now he's going to hide in the corner.
Yeah. So now white offers the trade, and he's offering the trade on the same file as that black pawn, so it looks like everything's going to get traded, and we're going to go for that draw. So we'll see. Nope, he's checking first once.
Check. And then...
He avoids it.
Rook e6.
So he's just avoiding it, but I think white can just take the pawn, so same thing will happen.
Well, okay, so if problem is though, if he does take the pawn, he's got some tricky trap, cheap endgame tricks from Magnus with b5.
Oh, with the idea to
play b4.
b4, and then king a4, and then rook b2.
Rook a2 mate.
Yeah. This is a little tricky, but yeah, unrealistic perhaps.
Well, I mean, actually, I saw this in game, and Vishy's got 3 minutes left on his clock, and he looked pretty panicked after this move. He was.
I guess if you only got 3 minutes, I guess they got 3 moves to the next time control, so it's
He spent 2 minutes.
2 minutes to play that. Okay. So his idea here, I guess, is that he can check maybe,
Yeah.
or just promote. So also, if b5 was played there, we could check with the rooks and take off the rooks there, so that'd be fine.
Yeah. So it's looking like it's gonna
It's gonna
end
be a
okay.
draw, but yeah, Magnus is trying basically everything he can to make fisherman. And now this has been taken, I imagine that.
Although that checker's kind of strange.
Yeah, but I guess he can just go here, so it's
double
fine.
it. And now I can take it, and now this is coming off, and that's it.
That's the end.
Fishy survives.
Okay, so we have a fourth draw in a row, but it was interesting because I'm not sure really how much Vishy intended to give the pawn, because he had spent a lot of time before that point, but he did manage to get a lot of play out of it, which, even if he wasn't planning, that was probably his intuitive feeling that he could push the bishop around to get that. But I think Magnus dealt with it well, and obviously he was even trying little things in the endgame to try and make something more of it.
Yep, so an interesting game for the fourth game of this World Championship series.
Yeah, and I'd basically say every game that's gone on has got more interesting, actually. The first two were a bit kind of off, but then we had a decent draw in the last one, and then this was obviously a very fighting game, so...
Let's see what Game 5 brings in our next video.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess this is a good time to sign off. Sub to our vids and like them or whatever. If you do like them, leave comments. We're always happy to hear your comments, I guess, and critique of our videos, and say if you enjoy them. Alright, then that's it from us. It's goodbye from me, Fusion, and goodbye from the person who I'm talking to now. Who's that?
It's calm. Bye.